Hi.
Good morning.
Yes. Is it morning?
Not for us right now, but for our listeners who are anxiously awaiting the dropping of this new episode.
Unless our listeners are in Australia or in Asia.
Or anywhere in the world, but they're listening in the morning.
Well, this whole episode is about automotive travel, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
So maybe we should respect those who are not in our time zone. Derek, Tam-Scott.
I'd rather not. We haven't driven any Australian cars. I haven't driven any Australian cars.
I have driven a Pontiac G8 GXP and
a GTO.
A Chevy SS. I've never driven a GTO. Oh. However, this whole discussion started from the idea that people who don't experience... The old head of PR at Mercedes had a saying, those who are shocked easily aren't shocked often enough. And I feel like...
Was that in prelude to introducing a particularly ugly car?
No, he had some great lines. He was the one who, when the R129 SL came out and we all gasped and started laughing, he started clapping and said, it was the best line ever. He said, good design is immediately apparent. Great design takes time. And we just like booed him out of the room, basically. He had a bunch of great sayings, but those who are not shocked often enough was in response to somebody being horrified by something terribly offensive that he said, which was most of the things that left his mouth, which is why I respected him. So, however, we're going to talk about people who are maybe a little bit myopic. Focused. I like that. Forward focused.
If that's
Mercury
your drug
Milan,
of choice.
Yes, exactly. So let's get down to it. This is the Carmudgeon Show. This is part of the Haggerty Podcast Network. If you like this, I have to do the whole thing. If you like this content, please consider joining the Haggerty Drivers Club, which includes unlimited access to our valuation tools, a subscription to our award-winning magazine, unlimited guaranteed flatbed tows for all of your classic vehicle, discounts on stuff and invitations to special events and all kinds of happy shit like that. There's a link below. As I'll probably say later in the episode, you can also buy this stupid t-shirt that I made because the Haggerty Drivers Club clearly doesn't pay me enough. Or I am exercising my creative juices.
Well, I don't think I should add any other words besides Jason's juices, which will accompany us on this episode of the Carmudgeon Show. That's Jason Cammisa. I'm Derek Tam-Scott. Thank you for joining us.
So we go.
Well, I'm glad I found my missing water bottle.
I probably should have told you it was not missing.
It's fine. I hypothesized that it might turn up.
Yeah. I wasn't entirely positive it was yours until I looked at the episode and saw you drinking out of it. And I'm like, haha.
Yes. I have two other orphaned ones somewhere in the universe. I'm pretty sure that I left one of them at the gym because I see someone carrying one around that looks like this, and I suspect that
you should engrave like the Cadillac logo right down there.
My dad always, or a Dymo, one of those old-fashioned Dymos, the one where the letter, the print to label thing, but it's the ones, the old style ones that don't have printer, but it does an impression. When I was a child, I thought this was perfectly normal. When I was a child, I thought all my drawers were labeled with what was inside using one of those things. And I thought that was like a very normal thing until I realized it was just my dad's OCD. So it was like socks and underwear and like t-shirts and then like long pants.
I have a potential confession to make that my tool drawers are labeled that way.
With an impression type
not
Dymo?
An impression type,
but
a
the modern printer one.
Because I had somebody, and initially this started as somebody, Sam Smith actually came to my house to work on a car and he couldn't fucking find anything. So I made labels. And then he made fun of me in print saying any good mechanic knows where their tools are and doesn't need a label. I'm like, I did this for you, you schmuck. So of course, typical Sam, like, giving me shit for helping him. But then when I got the warehouse and made the toolboxes there, I labeled them all because there's so many drawers there and I have so many toolboxes that I was like, wait, how did I decide to organize this drawer? This is a squeezy thing. Some of of course, because it's me, all of the labels are offensive and inappropriate, but like squeezy things, like what else are you going to call it? That's like things that squeeze. So yeah, then there's like tune-up shit. Like what am I going to do? Gun-shaped things, like, a timing gun, but a heat gun or like, anyway. I think that was the inadvertent start of this episode.
Okay.
Your dad's OCD with what was it called? A Dymo?
Dymo. D-Y-M-O. They still make devices, but I think they're printy ones. I don't think they're maybe they still make the ones that actually, yeah.
Those were cool as shit.
Yeah.
I remember them. Right. So there is a quotation.
That was riveting.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Is that some sort of pun about a
riveting gun.
Yeah, rivet gun. We were recording a bunch of new Revelations episodes. Spoiler alert. They're really
that was very spoiling.
Here, and Anthony Esposito. Well, we had a friend of mine come in, and it's a friend of ours who's got a lot of opinions that will actually drive a whole nother episode. No, that's this. That wait, hold on. That is this. We just discussed like we actually for the first time in like 100 episodes have decided to plan out what's coming next. But that is this episode. Is this not? Yes.
This is the Mark Twain episode.
Yes, the Mark Twain episode, which is all actually a way of disguising a we hate people who only like one type of car episodes. So you haven't heard that yet.
Yes, you have. You heard it in the intro.
Yeah, but we can't tell them what the actual episode's about. We're going to be like foofy, hoity-toity, intelligent people who are quoting somebody like Mark Twain who didn't say something about.
To be
San
fair,
Francisco.
it was neither of us who did that. It was Anthony Esposito.
That's exactly. Esposito was quoted. Esposito is a highbrow bitch. You heard that here first. Hashtag Espo, whatever his fucking social medias are. Anyway, so we had two cars here, and one shocker was a Sacco era Mercedes, and the other one was a similarly aged BMW. And he went fucking off on how shitty the BMW was compared to his Mercedes. And he owns like 100 fucking Sacco era Mercedes.
Which is a somewhat recent transition, it should be noted.
Yes. So this person who we'll refer to as GG. GG, when we all met him, he had like an E92 335i convertible. Oh, E93, it was convertible.
And he had an M Roadster, an Imola Red, the clown shoe but no roof, the Z3 M Roadster.
He had previously had a bunch of E30s, but then graduated to like E34s, which he considers the best car in the world, and then E39s, which he considers even better. So he was like BMW fanboy. And at some point, I think broke down in a 944 that his mom had as a kid. So had a sort of tangential Porsche fanboyism. And then sort of decided to go big league with a Rosso of Corso Ferrari and 993.
With no roof.
You can insult it all you like. I like convertibles.
I don't like, well, especially for a Ferrari, I don't like them open.
As long as they're not red.
Yeah, well, it was red and a convertible.
Yeah, it was red tan convertible.
And a Porsche Turbo Cabriolet.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. So a turbo cab.
997 Turbo Cab.
Manual though, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah. So, and then an Aston V8 Vantage,
which I'm sure he bought on your recommendation because everybody who knows you, who listens to you, buys one of those on your recommendation.
I sold so many of those cars. I love that thing. So he had sort of big cars and then discovered the joy of shitbox ownership.
And this is, I'm sure, due to you, perhaps me also, because this is all I do now, is buy Sacco era Mercedes for no money, and you can get like a really superb world-class example for $15,000. And then it's like, my God, why would you not buy world-class examples of some of the finest cars ever made for $15,000? So now he's a full Sacco convert.
I mean, has had 3 R129 SLs. A green one, a black one with special edition, and now a red one that's gorgeous. Not red, it's whatever that color is.
Yeah, it's the 40th anniversary metallic dark red. 1997.
About 200,000 are 124s of different body styles.
Oh no, he's only had 3 or 4.
I
300 a cabriolet, a 400 sedan, and a 300 sedan, or 320 and 420.
There's another one in there. There's another one. Well, so I'm also lumping him in with our other good friends who've got a 124 wagon. He's always trying to get a 124 wagon. So the other thing is I wake up every morning to like 4 text messages from like auctions of like, oh, I should buy this. Oh, I should buy this. He just went and drove another one of our friends' 500E because he was thinking about replacing the 400E with the 500E, but then decided his E300 sedan. Either way, he's got a sedan, a convertible.
This is dreadfully boring.
He's looking for a coupe. Anyway, he's become a total Mercedes whore.
Yes.
And started to insult the BMW and just went down this path that I thought was funny because he loves a good argument. So do I. And Anthony was vaguely offended.
Despite having owned exactly the same R129 in exactly the same color.
Yeah. Exactly, because at the same time that he owned the 129, he had a Maserati Quattroporte, so he knows the true meaning of misery. And he has a Miata and a GTI, and he's sort of, he had an M5 E39 M5. He bought an E30 when we were filming back in the day. So he's sort of all over the place. RX-8, sort of two of them, all over the place. And he brought out a Mark Twain quote to get to the quote 17 minutes in. Mark Twain wrote upon returning home at some point, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. And typical writer quote, that's really intelligent.
Shocking.
Yeah. And so, the idea here is if you've experienced another culture, another country, you're far less likely, or even it's impossible to be prejudiced against those people. And I found that the people who are most anti sort of other countries and other cultures and other religions are those who've never experienced it. I moved to
it is othered. It is treated as some kind of foreign threat, and it is different, so it is therefore wrong.
And it's just always as humans, we're sort of hardwired to say, well, they're different, therefore it's us versus them. Right?
Yes.
I moved to Germany in 1990, and I was 15 years old. And there was a school teacher who lived up the street who I had a friendship with, and she was probably 82 at the time. She was sort of very aged, and so I'm sure she had seen some things, having lived through World War II. And although I don't think in upstate New York she was on the fighting front, but we were moving to Germany, and she was just like absolutely fascinated that we were going to do this. And I came back after the first summer, and she started asking questions. And this is a school teacher, and this has always resonated with me, asking how we got on without electricity.
What?
And I was like, what? Huh? Like your reaction exactly. I'm like, we have electricity. And she's like, really? Germany is civilized enough to have electricity? And I remember my answer was Mercedes-Benz comes from Germany. If Germany is civilized to make Mercedes-Benzes, don't you think they have electricity? And she's like, wow. And I'm like, she's like, so what does a German kitchen look like? And I'm like, well, we have a mic. You have a microwave oven? She had just gotten a microwave, and she was very,
very advanced. The newest thing she could think of.
Yeah. And she was just shocked that, German civilization was the same as American civilization. And then when I was describing the way sort of Germany works, it was even more advanced in some ways than she was just fucking mind was blown about this. And even the idea of speaking a different language. She's like, well, at home they speak, like she had never seen another, again, rural upstate New York, never seen anyone speak another language and thought it was like a front that they did. Like when we're at home, we speak pig Latin to each other, right? But really, when we need to convey a message, we speak English. That was my first sort of exposure to what happens when you've not experienced different things. And so, when Anthony gave this quote, we sort of then applied that to GG and his lack of experience with other cars.
Which is funny because he has experienced plenty of other cars.
And yet, when
concludes that a Sacco-era Mercedes-Benz is the finest car in the world, which
because of course it is.
It's not entirely wrong.
Really?
I don't know. I've experienced a shitload of cars, and I still return to Sacco-era Mercedes-Benzes, and that's not accidental.
As the actual finest cars of all time?
It depends on how you measure it, but I think that there are certain things that Sacco-era Mercedes-Benzes do better than any other car in the world. And they're things that I value. And they also are, like, free.
I was going to say, considering the price,
yes,
I would fully agree with you that are effectively the best cars in the world to own and interact and collect with as classics.
In terms of, for what they cost, against the other things that you could buy at the same price point at any particular time that, is Sacco-era cars. So this is called the 80s and 90s. And this was true earlier as well. Mercedes-Benz cars were in a different league from pretty much anything else in terms of the quality of construction and engineering.
Yeah. So you start thinking W201 versus E30. No contest.
Yep. I think that's true of E36 also.
E36 versus 2000 versus W202. Okay.
Early 202.
So the interior wasn't shitified yet.
Yes.
But it was.
Or even a 201. What do you think is a better made car, a 201 or an E36? This is 190E. 190E versus BMW E36.
That's tough. E36s are incredibly robust with shit interior that falls apart. So
and
other than
except for the cooling system,
it was just a maintenance item, right?
I mean, but who uses a plastic water pump impeller?
Everyone. Everyone. Now, yes, exactly. They were just ahead of their time. I mean, yeah, an M50. I mean, M50 engines last forever. So, okay, first of all, if we do four-cylinder to four-cylinder, BMW wins. As bad as that fucking four-cylinder 318 was.
The M42.
M42. Compare that to a C220's miserable...
Yeah, it's like a tractor.
Tractor motor. Or C230 on W203. The Mercedes four-cylinders after the 201 turned to shit. All the 16-valve four-cylinders were shit.
Except for the first one.
But I think there is the first... Oh, well, that was not theirs. That was Cosworth. Sorry.
Just the top of it.
Made all the difference in the world. I think there's some argument to be said. There's some argument to have between 202 and E36.
I agree. I don't think it's as decisive. Okay, let's go to the top of the market and say 7 Series versus S-Class.
So this would be W140 Princess Diana S-Class versus, I guess there was no overlap to E38, so E32.
No, E38 came out in 95.
Okay.
Model year 95 for
so
the United States
we have a time
market.
shift here. Okay, so E32 versus 140. Don't forget that 140 was a complete fucking disaster when it came out. They had to recall them all in Germany because they were blowing tires because they were so fucking fat and heavy that there were no tires that could sustain that much speed and that much weight simultaneously. So the 140 did not have a beautiful start in Europe. Here, by the time it got here a year later, they'd figured out all the shit. And other than the fact that you shouldn't actually be able to die in one unless you're stupid enough to not wear your seatbelt. Sorry, Princess Diana. That was a spectacular car.
I think it counts in terms of all of the cars that I've interacted with, and it is some. I think it might be one of the best cars ever made in terms of like the quality of the device.
So I guess the question is, are you totally looking past its poor proportions and ill-conceived sort of shape?
Yes.
Okay.
Next question.
Because the 140 did have a problem, right? The 140 was so wide that they couldn't make seats wide enough, so they had to invent that, they had to use a strip of cloth in between the seat and the center console because you could lose your child down it. And that
Is that really that important?
It was an admission. It was part of a number of compromises that they had to build into this car, that it was just too big.
By modern standards, though, it's not that large.
I know, but by German standards, they couldn't figure that shit out. So, but the fact that the car is they had to do that weird strip around the back to distract your eye from the fact that the tail was so tall and so wide that
the other thing I think they really messed up was the monolithicness of the C-pillar into rear fender. Like if you look at a 124 or most cars, there's hips there that exist between the body of the car and the greenhouse, and the greenhouse is narrower than the body, and you get this sort of breaks up this large monolithic shape. And they didn't do that on the 140 for some reason, and it, I think, suffers aesthetically. I'm not really speaking in terms of aesthetics when I talk about how great the 140 is, though. I'm talking about the sort of experience.
Right.
Like the first time I ever drove one as an adult, with literally the first pulling out of the parking lot, I said, "Holy shit," aloud, and I was alone in the car. And I had owned, 10 or more other Mercedes of the same era, 129s and 124s. It is that different. It is that substantial of a difference between the 140 and even other Mercedes-Benzes. So
the closest thing to it would be 129, to be honest.
Yes, but the 129 has no roof. And so it doesn't have this. There was something about it that is just really incomparable that I don't even know how to put into words. It's like going on. It's a sense of well-being. It's like being on a beach on vacation and the temperature's just right. It's not too windy. It's not too sunny. It's not too hot. And you're just sitting there and you're like, everything is perfect. There's nothing that I wish to change about this experience. It's not an overwhelming, awe-inspiring experience. It's not like skydiving. It's the opposite of that. But there's this rightness to the experience that I have not really experienced in any other car that I can think of. And that is the result of, a bunch of engineering decisions, and some people complain the seats are too hard and blah, blah, blah. But to me, it's a very much just right type of experience that is pretty incomparable.
I mean, I think Mercedes has not bettered that car's ride quality since, for example. No, I think the I would agree with you that the 140 is a high watermark overall, but So when we get to E32, by comparison, I think the E32 handled better, had better steering, looked better.
Yes, it's a BMW. Right. It's not a Mercedes. That was not one of the real important metrics of an S-Class at that time.
But then you jump to E38, and now we have a problem.
Yeah, the E38 I think is the best 7 Series ever made.
Yeah,
and the 140 is probably the best S-Class ever made.
Right. So you get to an E38 with 740iL. For example, compared to an S-Class. Is that Mercedes that much?
It depends on what you're judging it against, right? If you were a driving enthusiast, the E38 is far better. And I owned an E38 740i Shorty Sporty at 2001, and I liked that car very much. But to me, it felt like a sort of logical extension and enlargement of a 5 Series.
Oh, yeah,
whereas this S-Class, to me, after driving E-Classes and then getting into it for the first time, I was like, this feels like a different car. Like it's in a different league. Whereas as opposed to it being the same philosophy, but expanded and made more luxurious. And there's something like, Sonda special about the S-Class that really makes it stand apart from everything else. And to me, the E38, it has I think it's the most beautiful BMW sedan ever made. Like better than an E39 or any other BMW sedan ever made. And I think it drives athletically much better, but it doesn't give you this sense of imperiousness and isolation and quality. And the question is do you want a Rolls-Royce experience, which I think the Mercedes S-Class actually does better than a Rolls-Royce? Yep. Or do you want a sort of athletic car that does it all, that is very sort of oriented towards the driver? The S-Class is not other than that, unless you are appreciating the ride quality and the sense of isolation and solidity and quality. And so it really depends how you're judging the car. Most enthusiasts would choose the E38 experience. Yeah. For me, the S-Class is like the archetype of big, comfy luxury sedan, and then you put that in your garage next to a 911, and then you have this really complete solution. For me, I've always this is elitist, but I've always felt that BMWs were for people who couldn't afford both a Mercedes and a 911, and so that you get a BMW to cut the line in the middle where it's one car that does it all. This is true of M5s, right? Or an M3. It has 4 doors and has a trunk, and you can use it for the school run, or you could take it to the track. If you could only have one car and it needed to do everything, then a BMW M3 or M5, and I'm talking E39 or earlier M5, is the car to do that. And me personally, now that everything's depreciated, I can have an S-Class and a 911, and to me, then you choose the right tool for the job, and you get the most maximum representation of that sports car experience and of the luxury sedan experience. And then you're not trying to make this, because those are engineering wise objectives. They are super diverse objectives of what a BMW should, an ultimate driving machine versus luxury car. And the E38 does a great job of walking that line, but it doesn't do as good a job at the luxury car thing as an S-Class, and it doesn't obviously because it's a 7 Series, doesn't do sports car things either, but it is a really athletic car for the size.
I think we both need to go and drive an S500 versus a 740i L back to back, because if I don't think I ever have driven them back to back. And so the Mercedes definitely has a more Rolls-Roycean feel, but to my memory, a 750iL rides every bit, or 740iL rides every bit as good as the Mercedes.
Yeah, and it's not ride exclusively.
It's sort of like ride. Okay, so it had dual pane windows, so it was,
which the 750 did as well.
Right. Oh, true. They were. I mean, I just remember the S-Class being an isolation tank, but every single time I got into a long wheelbase E38, I felt like I was in the world's most opulent limo. Yeah,
I don't feel that way in those cars. This is interesting because I had a friend who had a E38 750 Highline, and the Highline has the contrasting light seats, dark piping. There was dark blue on the outside with a ivory colored interior with blue carpets and blue piping, wood inlaid all around. It's a very nice place to be, for sure. To me, it just doesn't quite get the sort of peasants out of my way vibe the way that a W140 S-Class does.
But what it does do is get that sports car out of my way peasant on a back road.
Yes.
And so it's an interesting discussion, because there's
it's subjective. It's a personal preference thing. Yeah. To me, there's something unmatched about the 140 S-Class in terms of its imperiousness that a BMW E38 just doesn't.
Okay, so to get you to travel and thus not be a German car whore, where does a Lexus LS 400
I don't have
fit
enough
in?
time in those cars to know.
Because I think the world sort of agreed that actually the LS 400 did a better job.
Well, especially because it was $40,000 in 1990 when it came out, and a 560 SEL in 1990 was 65, I think.
That's it?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was looking at a price card recently, so I think it was...
Because wasn't an S500 when it came out?
No, it was 75. It was 75 for a 560 SEL, and then it was 83 for a 560 SEC, and then it was 90 for an SL 500.
Right. And then but if you go fast forward a couple years, and Lexus was up to 50K by 93, but an S500 was 100.
Yes.
92 base, right?
Yeah, when the 140 came out, they got quite a bit more expensive.
Crazy
because
expensive.
they are
right.
quite a bit more car.
And so I think,
it's
we tend to always talk about German stuff, but that LS is truly like, how the fuck did this happen? And so, right, I think this is the problem, is you need to travel to Japan.
Yes, it's on my list of things to do. I'm interested in those cars. But then, of course, the other thing that is a really material factor is... how do I put this? You have to have a lust factor for the car, and maybe some cars I do, and some cars I don't have that experience with, and maybe it's one of those cars where when I experience one firsthand, I would develop that, but I don't currently feel that. And there are also plenty of cars that I do feel that for, but then I experience it for the first time, and it evaporates. Right. Like Aston Martin V550 Vantage was one of those cars where I lusted after it really profoundly till I drove one. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm not interested. Completely off the list. It happens all the time. It does happen all the time. And that is, I almost like it at times, because some of these cars are so out of reach that you could never own it. And once you experience it, you meet it firsthand and you realize that it's actually not very good, or it doesn't really do very much for you, then you can sort of just remove it from a consideration, and there's no pang of desire to want to own that car and not be able to. There's a lot of cars that are like, BMW E9 is like that for me.
Really?
The CS, yeah.
I mean, they're stunningly beautiful, and they drive fine.
They drive fine. Right. It's unremarkable. It drives like a 6 Series. It's just...
Have you driven a CSL?
Yeah. Immensely disappointing.
Right?
Immensely disappointing.
In the same... Okay, why?
Here's the reason why.
God, Derek is all fired up today.
No, so the reference point for that car, because if you think about what it was used for in period, and you imagine the Batmobile kit on it, and you imagine it going around at IMSA and going around Nürburgring in period and in touring car races, you think it's going to be just this really exciting experience, right? The formula is very similar to the formula that Porsche used when they made the Carrera RS. In terms of lightning and performance modifications, it's from the same era. And so my sort of reference point for thinking about what I was going to experience the first time I drove a CSL road car was Carrera RS. And the Carrera RS, I maintain, is one of the best 911s to drive ever made. And it's certainly top 5. And so my expectations were that it was going to, and there's a marked transformation between a regular 911 and a Carrera RS during this period, and I'd driven a regular E9, and so I was expecting a similarly large step in experience
fizziness
change. And yes, fizziness and light, and just really perceptible lightness. Like you can tell immediately, just letting the clutch out in a Carrera RS, you can tell it's light, because the car sort of, you don't have to give it much revs, because the car is so little. It's like a motorcycle, when you move off, it just moves off the line really aggressively because it doesn't have much weight. And so just the CSL just feels like a regular car. And that was really disappointing for me.
To me, it wasn't the fact that it feels like a car. It's the fact that it doesn't feel any different than a regular E9, and also the engine isn't angry. It's still a very refined GT. Yeah. So the drawbacks are all the frame flex and all the money, but no fucking
actual substance.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode on heartbreakers. Honestly, E31 was the biggest one for me. 850i.
I've never driven one. Any E31.
You're shitting me.
Never.
850i was so high on my list because it was 2 M20s. So it was 2 of my favorite straight sixes joined at the crank. And it was, I think to this day, one of the most beautiful German cars ever made. And it was everything you ever wanted in a big fat Ferrari 550 type car. And then
just disappoint.
disappointing. But we'll do an episode on that. Heartbreakers are tough. I like the idea that you look on the bright side and say, well, now that's off the Christmas card list. That happened to me when I decided I was going to buy a Ferrari.
And an NSX.
And it's an NSX. Same thing. Just immediately off my list. Okay, now I don't have to buy a Ferrari until you showed up with the GT4.
Yeah. Well, and this is the nice thing that has happened from, the benefit of travel. And we both have this as part of our jobs, that we get to experience lots of cars. It has probably taken, I don't know, at least 15 years of experiencing cars for me, where I have, every time you experience a new car, you are getting it's a single dot.
Data point.
It's a single point. And it takes years and years of assembling lots of points where you actually get to see the picture. Mm-hmm. But for the first 5, 10, maybe even 15 years, you're actually just looking at a bunch of little dots that are individual. And sometimes you can say, this dot's close to this other dot, and now I sort of get some relationship has emerged. But it's only through experiencing literally thousands of cars where you have enough dots where you can actually get some coherent picture of a particular era or time or place, that you can understand how things are interrelated. Mm-hmm. And that helps a lot with experiencing old cars. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasts who old cars are completely disinteresting to them, and they have no desire to sort of go there. And I think a lot of that is, if you have a single old car experience, you don't really have the context to understand why it is important or what was impactful about that or whatever. And so as a point in isolation, it's hard to make sense of that experience until you have enough adjacent points to come up with some meaningful understanding perspective of, the landscape.
I'll find that sort of even quote unquote worse is a value judgment, but even worse than people who are single marque enthusiasts, it's single model enthusiasts, or even worse, because you'll say, well, okay, they not only do they like, for example, Mercedes or Sacco era Mercedes, it's specifically a 124, and then it becomes a full days long discussion about like a pre-facelift versus post facelift, or this package versus that. Yeah. And we're talking about there's substantive differences between any of those cars for sure, but then it becomes a day's discussion about two data points that are effectively 2 millimeters apart on this mosaic that you're talking about, when there are things that are 1.5 miles in the other direction that might actually be.
And this happens with Corvette guys, right? Corvette guys are always like, mine was the only one with the N14 side pipes, and this color was 1 year only, Riverside Gold, and blah, blah, blah. And everyone gets down these rabbit holes, and it's like, you look into someone's collection, you're like, you're literally having the same experience every time you drive one of your 30 cars, but they're all the same. And Porsche people do this, BMW people do this. Yeah. And this is why you also get these weird market dynamics where, it's a 426 Hemi Cuda convertible and they only made 6 of those, or, Laguna Seca Blue M3s are worth 100% more than a silver one that's otherwise identical, right? All these people are looking for ways to differentiate cars that are actually all the same. Right. Porsche people, are very guilty of this also. And so if I had just a massive pile of money in a huge garage, the number of Porsches I would own, even though I'm a big Porsche guy, is, probably 10% of the cars at most would be Porsches, despite being like a publicly outspoken Porsche enthusiast, because there's not that many different ways you can sort of recombine those ingredients that are interesting. I wouldn't want any of the 4-wheel drive automatic turbocharged convertible ones. And so you're like, so now you want a 2-wheel drive manual closed 911, I would want probably like one from every other decade, and then that kind of solves my 911 needs, or Porsche needs. And so there's just these wildly different experiences. It happens with eras too, I think. Although then you get into issues of usability. Pre-war cars not so usable.
Hey, listen, now that, an M5 is now 5,400 pounds, I will say that none of our old cars are safe anymore. So, it's not just the pre-war cars, it's the pre-2000s, pre-2020s cars that are going to become unusable or unusably unsafe.
It depends on your risk profile. I ride a motorcycle, so I'll drive anything and don't give a shit.
It's getting to the point where we're driving, I'm looking around at every Rivian around 7,000 pounds. It just keeps getting worse every year.
Yeah, as you drive around in a 2,200 pound car or whatever.
1,300, whatever. Yeah. it's pretty scary. But part of that whole discussion with GG last week was we had two other friends who were a couple. They've been together since the 90s, and they met at a car show. And he was a total Mustang enthusiast, and she was a Honda enthusiast. And they wound up meeting at car meets or whatever, noticed each other, and then racing on the highway very legally in Mexico. And she had an Integra and he had an old Mustang, and she beat him. And that was his sort of like light bulb moment of like, well, I should probably consider these import things, which is just such a funny thing to say. And I kind of love their assemblage of cars, because they have like stuff that's American, they have stuff that's Honda, but then they also have sort of other stuff from around the world. And I just loved hearing that story of like, while GG is bitching about like the fucking BMW is a piece of shit, even though he's got a 540 i6 speed, himself, E34.
Yes.
Which, by the way, because the M30 is the best engine in the world, is better than M20s because, bigger is better. That whole conversation drives me nuts.
M30? That's not an M30 though.
Right, but he's looking for M30 powered cars because he won't go to an M20 because M30 is a better thing overall because it doesn't have a timing.
M20 belongs in a small car.
I'm sorry. I have a lot of experience with M30s, and every one of them has been a disappointing experience, including E28 M5s and CSLs.
That's
right?
Not an M. Well, the CSL's an M30, but this M5 is not an M. It's the bottom of an M30.
And there's bottom of an M30, and they're all still too refined and too boring. M20s are still the more characterful engine. I don't care if it needs a timing belt every couple of years, right? That's my attitude on it. But there's this sort of absolutism to his.
This is the result of a thing that a lot of enthusiasts do, especially who don't have enough seat time or real world experience, is that you go based on the numbers and the spec sheets and reading magazine articles by people who may or may not know, or may not be cut from the same cloth and value the same things that you don't value. And so, there are, as I have spent more time doing this, there are increasing numbers of times where I read things where historically I would just be like, yes, that person knows what they're talking about. They're writing for this or that outlet or a magazine or on whatever website. And now, as I am a more discerning consumer from assembling all those thousands of single dots, I find myself just blatantly disagreeing, or that they're completely wrong about this assessment of thing or other thing. And it's are
they wrong in their facts, or are they wrong in their opinion on and value judgment on?
Well, they'll say something has steering feel when it doesn't. I don't know, like that's sort of objective. Or they'll describe an engine as torquey when it's really not, because reasons I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I asked because this morning I got forwarded a link to a 45-minute long video criticizing me about my Cybertruck review and talking about how I got every single thing wrong about the whole thing because it's the worst pickup truck ever made. And I watched a couple minutes of it, and I got bored. It's nothing that I haven't heard from the fucking entire internet, including Matt Farrow when that whole thing started. The ultimate takeaway was that I gave the Cybertruck a positive review, and it's a terrible product. And okay, sure, fine. If you don't like it, that's great. But the people who are buying it seem to like it, and I wasn't reviewing that. I was talking about the engineering behind the car, and I think my big mistake on that, and why I'm I'm sick of it and still hearing about all this shit, is I think I failed to talk about failed to qualify that this is an objective look at the engineering behind the truck. Rather than a full review, because I didn't drive it on the fucking road. We're looking at engineering. I think I fucked up there. But yeah, no, I look at old reviews too, and I often flip back to the first page. Fuck wrote this? Like they got it totally wrong.
Yes.
And it's an interesting place to be in when you've experienced that car in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But also,
I think context is extremely important. Also,
well, here's one that I hadn't thought of until this morning. I was driving the 308 this morning, and I've driven it all week, sort of like in and out, driven to the city a couple times and just been driving it. And what I realized is that most of my time in that car is with it cold. And so, I'm dealing with cold carburetors, which that thing starts and runs almost like a fuel injected car. But it's got a recalcitrant transmission that never wants to go into second gear, and every gear shift is tedious, and it sounds okay under 3,000 RPM. And so I'm always under $3,000 and being nice to it. And then I get into it, after having warmed it up, I stop somewhere, run into a store or whatever it is, and then get back in the car. And then now it's fully warmed up and I can actually use it as a fully warmed up thing. And oh my God, the thing is just fucking magnificent. And I sort of occurred to me as I was definitely not sliding sideways on a power oversteer in a mid-engine car in Mexico through an intersection, that I was like, this thing is just fucking magic. But most of the time that I drive this car, it's cold. Mm-hmm. Have I had to interact with a modern car while it's cold? Like, that was just what went through my head. It's like perspective. Do I, in the course of reviewing a modern car, spend time with it enough that I'm dealing with modern cars aren't typically much different when they're cold to when they're warm, but it does happen. Things do happen, and because we drive our cars so much when they're cold and warming up, is that a factor? Something that's ever factored into any review?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, this is also the importance of, I think, spending enough time with it to really get a sense of its full character. I think the E28 M5 is a really good example of this. I think the E28 M5 is pretty boring until you're really hauling ass, and then it starts to become pretty fun. But it spends a lot of its time in the real world use cases being boring. Yeah. The LFA was another car like that for me, where I kind of didn't really ever like it until I found just the right place to use it, where I could sort of see what it was actually good at. And unfortunately, that window is quite narrow in the real world of places where you can actually access the full brilliance of that car. And so I found myself not liking it for most of the time that I interacted with it. Until
we're going to disagree on that and do a whole episode on it, apparently.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. I mean, we disagree on NSX too.
Yeah. I mean, the only variant of the NSX that I've truly hustled is the Type R.
What NSXs have you dealt with in just sort of traffic?
The 3-liter ones.
And?
The regular 3-liter 5-speed. I don't know, it's fine. It's very easy to and sort of innocuous and pleasant.
And what about, okay, now factor in the price.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather have a 911.
Okay. What about S2000s?
Never hauled ass in one.
If you're here, you'd be dead if you had. Oh, yeah. Tree, backwards.
No, I think it also feels a little bit sort of, this is also a reflection of the fact that my standards for entertainment or in a car are different because I've spent so much time in cars that are carbureted and a lot of drum brake cars and a lot of cars where if you don't shift it just right, it'll call you out, and all these sort of like really genuinely cantankerous automotive experiences. And so a lot of times I will see people describe things as raw or analog, and they're talking about NSXs or Ferrari 550s, and I'm like, you have no idea what raw or analog is.
Yeah, it's because their data points are all right next to each other.
They're all the dawn of time for those people is 1990 or 95 or whatever it is. And so, like, to me, those cars feel incredibly like sort of refined and civilized and like a little bit boring and underwhelming as sensory experiences because if you were to
the breadth of your dots,
or the standard deviation, the center of the
oh god.
If you were to go one standard deviation in either direction for me, then you'd cover the period 1955 to 1999, 95. I don't know. Anyway, so I don't have a lot of experience with modern cars, and the bulk of my experience is from the era where they were thinking about switching from carburetors to fuel injection, and that's those are the experiences that I most enjoy. And so I find the modern fuel injected stuff with EFI to be just a lot less characterful.
Modern. Let's make sure we qualify that.
Electronic fuel. It has a computer in it.
So you're talking about 80s and 90s stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. My thing though is if you, how do I say this without insulting? I know so many people with S2000s. If that is your high watermark for an entertaining sports car experience, you haven't experienced enough.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I don't.
Right. It doesn't sound good. Unlike almost every other Honda 4-cylinder, it doesn't have steering that talks to you. It's a terrible driving position. It's just it's fucking gorgeous. I mean, that car is beautiful. That's another heartbreaker for me. Every time I tried to buy an S2000, I drove it. I was like fine, sure, but a Miata is 3 times the experience.
Yeah, that's the real problem,
right?
K-swap Miata.
I mean, that would be a good Honda motor. Plus, yeah. But if a Miata could, like, imagine if ND looked like an S2000, what would you sell to buy that? Because I would have 3 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a hell of a.
I don't know. Very all modern and fuel injected.
But they, like if you, I mean, if ND, I can't have an ND. It's got electric steering. Like I'm fine with that on a daily driver, but not on a sports car.
This is the thing we always come back to, which is you can't buy a new car because, they're expensive and they're not as good as old cars.
Yeah. They're better. No, they're better than old cars. And I don't want good.
Depends on your definition of better, but yes, objectively better.
Yeah. They're safer and they're more efficient and they're faster and they're blah, 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 blah. More isolated and more refined and have nicer materials.
So what travel frontiers? I mean, we have many travel frontiers that remain.
So I have never driven a Chinese car, for example. That bothers me in a sort of new car setting. I mean, I've been really bad at driving modern cars for the last 6 months. I've basically stopped. And I'm like upset about this. So I need to jump back in there and start doing those stupid hashtag Cammisa verdicts because, I'm losing perspective on the new stuff, but I've also just kind of lost interest on that. I think we both need to experience like things like VinFast, for example, right? Vietnamese car company. I think we owe it to ourselves to see what the rest of the world is doing. So China and Vietnam in that case. I don't have a lot of experience with Americana stuff. That's to me the big hole.
Yeah.
Right. I still want a Cyclone badly.
Yeah.
But 60s and 70s American stuff, I've sort of driven like meh examples of stuff. And I think I owe it to myself to go drive some 60s American stuff.
Yeah, I have spent some time in those cars, but not a ton. They don't tend to prioritize things that are important to me. And so even if I have a fair bit of Corvette experience from the beginning through the late 60s. So C1, C2, and C3.
And I know.
Early C3.
Driven one C2. It was terrible.
They're terrifying.
That's the problem. It was the worst car I've ever driven.
Yeah.
But that motor was the little V8 and goddamn, that best shifter ever made.
But a bunch of people used that motor in things that were better. And so then you're like, if you want that motor, then you go experience it in a Bizzarini 5300 or
because I can find one on the street corner.
I do need more American car experience. I want more pre-war car experience too. I have enough to know sort of a few data points, but that I don't have a very full picture. I have a lot of dots from that era, but there's a lot of variability during that era also. Even between like the early 30s and late 30s, there's a really substantial step change in how those cars function, and I would like more experience in that realm for sure.
I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast or not, but we sort of have a scheduled Ford Model T drive.
We're going to do. That's going to be we should capture on video. I think
we probably should, because this is a friend of a friend who's got quite a lot of early Fords.
Early Fords.
And no standardized pedal placement, no standardized anything.
Yes.
And I would like the experience very much of interacting with those cars, because I think if you are manually manipulating timing, for example, like there's no better. Like I was talking to Colin, our friend, who's that mutual friend, and I just had a little bit of an epiphany with the Rover. I'm like, something's up with the 3500, which is my foray into Americana because it's a Buick V8. And I'm just like, what I didn't do ever is check timing. Like I've never done anything. I was driving and like something about this car's engine note never changes. Like no matter what you do, it's just this absolutely dead, no acceleration, slow as fuck, relaxed V8. And I kind of want a spicy psycho V8 American car. So I put my timing light on it and saw that it was supposed to be, I think it was like between 6 and 10 degrees. So standard like is 8 degrees of advance at idle, which goes up to 35. And it was at 2. So it was like 6 degrees off, which is big. And so I just sort of, it was like 800 degrees outside and I had 30 minutes to just get cars moved around. And so I just cranked some timing in, looked, it was still within spec, and took it for a drive. And we went from, when we drove the car back from Canada, it was fine. It passed smog. Like everything is great on it. But
probably doesn't anymore.
Probably doesn't. But we couldn't get it to rev past 5,200. It was sort of it. Like the red line was 6,000. And when I read the road tests of it, they were like, we got the best acceleration number by going deep into the red and going all the way to $6,000, which is the hard red. So it sort of starts, I think, at like 5,500. We couldn't even get to the 5,500. Well, now the fucking thing pulls really hard to $6,000. It's not fast, and I'm not sure it's any faster, but it woke up, it unlocked 1,000 RPM worth of usable or more worth of usable range. And that's my experience in adjusting timing, is get out of the car and move something. And, now I'm moving the whole curve up and the whole thing. Can you imagine being able to actually interact with that in real time with like a little dial? Like that will teach us more about, what I have. My cabbie doesn't want to start. Like it just cranks hard. It cranks. And it's done it since the last time I did a timing adjust. So I know I have too much advance in the thing. Wouldn't it be so cool to be actually trying to crank the thing or in this case, turning the crank yourself and actually being able to interact with that in real time. I think there's so much to be gained. And mixture. There's so much to be gained with listening to what too much timing or too much fuel or too little fuel actually sounds and feels like. And I think we would all be better enthusiasts if we could actually play with those things.
So in some distant form, I mean, I would like to own some kind of pre-war car, and eventually I hope to do that.
Yeah. Same. I just kind of, to your point of, wanting to experience different things, the things that made American cars of the 60s and 70s special are things that don't really work in this geographic area. I will say that the Fox body shitbox that I drove for the Dark Horse episode was one of the best experiences that I've had. I had more fun and more smiles in that thing.
Yes, and this is the thing, that those experiences are not objectively good, but they're so sort of singular and rich in texture that it's kind of magical. There's like one of my all-time there are a handful of American cars that I truly lust after. One of them is the 1957-58 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham, and this car cost twice as much as the next most expensive Cadillac. They made 400 of them. They were only advertised in one place, which was Fortune magazine. It has a stainless steel roof and comes with all this vanities shit, magnetic shot glasses, which magnetize to the inside of. And there's 6 of them.
One for the driver, of course.
One for each occupant, and they go on the inside of. They magnetize to the inside of the glove box door, and it comes with a perfume atomizer and a little mirror and a cigarette case and all this shit. And I've driven one once, and the experience, is like, it's got drum brakes. They're not great, but there's this sort of like, just it's not quite 140 like, but it's this sort of like road ownership experience where you feel really expensive and important in that car. And it's so squishy as it goes down the road, and it's so isolated. And you just imagine sort of a world where that is the criterion by which you are grading the car, and it's a very it transports you to another time and place. And cars that do that, I really appreciate. And so, even though the experience is objectively bad of driving a C2 or C3 Corvette, especially from the suspension and steering standpoint, there is something about hanging on as that motor is lighting off that's really magical. Yeah. And so those I like those experiences. The same reason I really want a Ford Galaxy to get that 427 experience in a pillarless coupe that seats 6 people. Like it's like wearing a different outfit or something like that, where you're just trying on a different identity. And there are definitely American cars that I want to do, and I'm sure if I experience more of them, there would be more that I would like. But I do really like feeling in control of the front end of the car. So I don't know how many of them I would truly resonate.
Although, I mean, I sort of had a joking conversation with another friend last week about the last 2 cars that I've bought are by far my biggest and heaviest, right? So the Rover, we have a cross plane crank V8, which I've never been a huge fan of, with no power in a sort of floppy structure in a British car with it's so different from every one of my other cars. And then the 850 CSI, which is, 42, 300, 400. I don't even know how much the fucking thing weighs because it would break any scale. I'd put it on, V12. Okay, it's still a manual. Like, I still want to interact directly with the engine. But I wonder, am I getting old? No, because I still love the experience of the Beat. I mean, I last week got out of the Beat and into the CSI, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, I just got out of with 656 cc to 5.6 and a half liters.
What's fun is that your Honda Beat is the amount of displacement that separates a regular 850 from an 850 CSI.
Yes. Yeah.
It might be 50 cc's off.
I was sort of doing the math on that stuff, like 656 cc for that whole engine. What cars do I have where one cylinder is bigger than that? It's actually not as many cars you think. It's the 2.3.
That's because you don't have a lot of big displacement cars.
Well, I mean, a 2.3 liter is a big four-cylinder.
Yeah.
And that's it. Because my V8s are a 2.7 and a 3.5.
2.9.
2.9, sorry, 2.9. The
E30 of the BMW, the E30.
I really think everyone owes it to themselves to go drive
travel.
Something French, something Swedish.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like the whole French car experience. Like, we talk about this at length, which is that the convergence on sameness is really disappointing because I'm not sure that there are a lot of cars now that I could get into and I could identify the country that it came from based on the experience of the car.
Oh, good point.
Like,
I could probably blindfold you and put you in 6 modern SUVs.
Yes.
And you wouldn't know, and not tell you anything, you wouldn't know, forget about brand. You wouldn't even know what kind of engine it has because everything you're hearing is fake noise.
Mm-hmm. And if you go to, this was certainly true, I would say, into the 90s. French cars had a really, really unique feel.
You'd sit in the seat. You wouldn't even have to start the car.
Right.
Blindfolded, sit in the seat. You're in a French car.
Yeah.
Because you fall into
My 405 MI16 was like this. That was the first impression is just the seats are so squishy in that car. And the Citroën, unreal, especially the back seat, just absolutely wild.
And you look at the back seat and you don't even think like a 2 foot tall 5-year-old is going to be able to have enough headroom, and they just collapse and
and that's one of the things I most love about my Citroën is you put a person who gives no shits at all about cars into the Citroën, and they are going to be interested and engaged and like holy shit, have some holy shit moments from that experience because it is so divergent from anything else. That they will have experienced, that it like just blows their mind, and it will work on any person regardless of their interest level in cars if they have been in a car before, and so French cars definitely did that all throughout. I mean, certainly since the 30s, and into the 90s.
Yeah, up until everything really converged into one sort of car.
But I had a Peugeot rental car a couple weeks ago in Europe, and it felt totally unremarkable. Yeah. It was obviously 3 cylinders and it was a manual, but the
rest of it was unremarkable.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that are remarkable, random question. I saw a Chamal on a black Chamal on a flatbed, and about crashed into a tree. I saw stars. It was so fucking cool. Have you driven one?
And the funny thing about that car, the funny thing about that car is that it started as a bi-turbo somewhere under there, and it was one of those things where they just facelifted the shit out of it, and it went from sort of like a vaguely warm to like extremely hot.
And then, which I did not realize, I thought they were bi-turbo V6s.
They made a V8 version.
Twin turbo V8
yes,
or single turbo V8.
3.2 liter V8.
Fuck me! Why? Speaking of things that are outside of the little mosaic of stuff, let's buy a Chamal. I want one. I mean, somebody please buy me a Chamal, please. I beg of you.
Oh my god!
I'm going to start a Patreon.
These things.
You know what I can do? I can sell some of these shirts. I made a shirt, and it says "Professional Idiot on a Closed Course." And it's the Closed Course Productions logo that I made years ago with like a little thing. And maybe if I sell enough Closed Course shirt, I'll put a link in the description. You can buy these. What are those things?
You only have to sell 84 billion shirts. No.
Are they expensive?
The one you want, so there was a whole bunch of different versions of that car. There were some that were V6s that looked the same, and there was one that was a Ghibli and the Chamal, and the Chamal is the top of the desirability heap, I believe. But you could be spending anywhere from like 40,000 to like over 100, depending on whether you're getting a 6 or 8 cylinder one. I don't mind the V6 ones either.
I don't want want a V6.
No. I mean, I assume it's a flat plane V8 since it's the 32.
It sounds cross plane.
Oh, does it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I of course went right to YouTube and.
Oh, so it is cross plane.
I think it's a cross plane turbo and 5.3 to 5.3 to 100.
Stop talking. I don't want to know anything more.
We need you. Listen, we just discussed the whole mosaic thing of data points, and you have never driven one.
I want to drive it. I don't want to own it.
Why the fuck not? All right, well,
because biturbos are some of the most difficult cars to keep on the road in the history of man.
Whatever.
Because
this is a V8, it's totally different.
Not only are they Italian and all of the bullshit that comes with that, but they're also complex, right? The old Italian stuff, it's like, I don't know, it's got some carburetors and it's all mechanical and you can take it apart and figure it out. Like with the electronic fuel injection and add boost. Oh my God.
Fuck no. But okay, I hereby put
TVR.
out TVR
Another
fun, but I want to put an APB out because I want someone, whoever the fuck that was with that black Chamal in the San Francisco Bay Area, call a bitch. Let us know we want to drive it. We want to drive it. I'm sure it was on a flatbed for a very good reason.
Yes. It should be available in 6 to 9 months for its next drive of the year.
I think we need to challenge ourselves to think outside. I was just offered a potential drive in an XJ220 Jaguar. Never driven one of those.
I've heard they're actually very good. I've never driven one either.
All right. Well, let's push it outside the box. Let's travel, Derek Tam-Scott.
I always try.
Okay. Well, we should go to Detroit.
Well, I guess we have to take Delta.
Maybe your prejudice will go away when. No. We don't actually have to go to Detroit to stop.
The front ends of those cars just absolutely scare.
Surely
the shit
you
out of
have
me.
some terrible steering car, don't you?
Well, it might be feelless, but it's reasonably precise at least.
Yeah, that was my problem with the Corvette.
It's the lack of precision. Because what happens is you ping pong down the road because there's such a huge dead spot that the car is deciding to travel over here. But by the time you make your next input, it's 3 to 6 business days, and then it's just terrifying. Like it goes from being like vaguely interesting and like amusing to being like actually terrifying. Like what was some other pre-war car? An Auburn. 853 Speedster. That was a car that I drove like at 50 miles an hour, and I was like, "Get me out of this thing! I'm going to die."
Yeah, that's too fast for that car.
For that particular car, it was. But then I've driven like a Bugatti Type 57. It was perfectly
happy. It's
happy.
a Formula One car.
Well, it's
underneath,
not the 57, but
underneath it was a Bugatti.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the point, that there's so much variation among.
I drove a 19
any era of cars.
18 Peerless that Haggerty had in the Great Race. And that at 25 miles an hour was fucking terrifying, but cool. Yeah. Also the size of a neighborhood. So,
and each cylinder was probably the size of a gallon of milk.
2. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So this is your sign to go travel. Try
just
something new.
Turo something. Just go experience other cars.
Yeah.
Don't be like GG.
Oh my God.
He's gonna hear this podcast too, which is the funniest part. And he's not that bad, but it was just it incited in his sort of single.
I mean, at least it was about something that was really genuinely excellent. I mean, the point of all of that is that I continue to come back to Sacco era cars, because they're cheap and good, but there's something about those cars that, regardless of how much they cost, I would always come back to those as just a sort of
knowingly
benchmark experience for good engineering.
And he just bought a C43, and which means now I have 3 friends that have bought C43s since I had one, and that just makes me regret selling mine. Even that.
Well, that means you have people you can ask to borrow theirs.
Can I borrow your C43 AMG?
Yes.
Seriously?
I will let you know when the tires are ready for you to send them off.
That's what I like to hear. Those cars are experts at one-wheel peel.
Yes.
I have photographic evidence that I will send Jake. But for the record, when I do the thumbnail for this episode, there will not be a Sacco era Mercedes in the thumbnail. So I apologize to all of you who clicked on this link thinking, oh, finally an episode they're not going to talk about a Mercedes. Well, psych.
Yep. Our condolences.
Yep. Okay, until next week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Carmudgeon Show.